I think we might as well start.
Do you need some water down here?
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon.
Maybe so.
Thank you for coming to the Publishers panel. We realize we have no idea what we're supposed to do on this panel. Okay, is the microphone not working? Okay. So what we thought we'd do is we'd briefly have everyone introduce themselves, where they're from in terms of what publishing company, and then the sorts of things they're looking to acquire. And then we'd throw it open to questions and let you pretty much determine where the panel goes from there. So I'll start because I'm the moderator. I'm Robert Runte. I'm senior editor for Five River Books. I got to be senior editor, as I said earlier, because we hired a second editor. But our basic criteria is it has to be a book we like. That's about it. So we're actively looking for science fiction and fantasy because that's what the publisher and I are particularly interested in. We're also interested in young adult because that's the new editor we hired is a specialist in young adult. She's doing her PhD on young adult literature. And we're also, we do some nonfiction. I'm also editor on a series of 10 Shakespeare books, Shakespeare for Reader's Theatre. Getting to edit Shakespeare, highlight of my career. Apparently he's a really good writer. So if you're writing it, we're interested in anything genre, mystery. We're not into romance / erotica. I.e., we don't do porn, but that's okay. That'll be taken care of down the table. But outside of that, we're pretty much open to anything that strikes our fancy. So, next. You need to hear.
I'll share. I'm okay with sharing. Ellen and I are friends. So hello, I am Tina Moreau. I am with Tyche Books. We are a new publishing company here in Alberta, Canada. I am the co-owner and managing editor, so I make sure that the books look pretty and everyone gets to read them. I don't actually take care of the acquisitions for our press, but I am involved in the process. We are looking for anything where the main thrust of the story is science fiction or fantasy. So any subgenre thereof, science fiction / whatever you want, fantasy / whatever you want, we're good. We also do related nonfiction, so that would be nonfiction / science fiction or fantasy. So, for example, we have a nonfiction book coming out in November called What Kings Ate and Wizards Drank, and it is a fantasy lover's food guide. So that would be the kind of stuff that we're looking for in our press. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ellen Smith. I'm the publisher from the Champagne Book Group. We, up until 2 months ago, were based here in Calgary. We have moved to the big metropolis of High River. And we like it there. We are acquiring all kinds of things as long as it is fiction. Erotic romance, not porn. Because there is a difference. There's a plot. And all subgenres of erotic fiction. We are looking for horror, mystery, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, romance, historical romance. That might be about it. We publish primarily in electronic format. We make a great deal of money in electronic format. So our print books are an option for our readers and an option for our authors. We don't distribute them widely because our biggest thrust are our electronic format.
My name is Adrienne Kerr, and I'm the commercial fiction editor at Penguin Canada. And I am acquiring in the areas of women's book club fiction. That's the gray zone between literary and commercial. I'm acquiring crime novels, everything from cozy mysteries to police procedurals. I edit historical fiction as well. I do a little bit of science fiction and fantasy. I find it very difficult to raise sci-fi and fantasy authors to a really high level, a high-performing commercial level. So, for example, the only sci-fi writer on my list is Robert J. Sawyer, and the only fantasy writer on my list is Guy Gavriel Kay. So we're pretty selective. The book has to be beautifully written, and I have to fall in love with it to acquire it.
My name is Justin Perry, and I actually wear two hats. One is the erotic and romance publisher Breathless Press. Like Ellen said, for hers, we primarily do ebooks, and we do have a few print books, but that's not where our money is. The other hat is a young adult publisher, imprint, that does pretty much anything young adult, so fantasy, science fiction, horror, steampunk. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We don't do too many nonfiction. We have a few nonfiction titles coming out this year for Breathless Press. That's stories that have to do with finding romance, personal stories about like loving pets. That sounds really creepy. Not in that context. We don't do any bestiality. That's a big no-no. Yeah. But it's like people's love for their pets.
That could be creepy too.
Yeah. Okay, let me I'll just leave it there. Yeah. So that's what we're actively looking for. We're not actually actively looking for the nonfiction stuff. It's kind of in-house. So when you're in, you pretty much have free reign to write for anything that we do. Yeah, so that's the two hats.
I'm Patrick Swenson, and I'm the president, publisher, senior editor, art director, PR, media. It's just me. Fairwood Press. I'm the token American publisher here.
Welcome.
And thank you. And this is my second World's client, so I've been here before. And I've known many of the organizers here for this since the World Fantasy in Calgary. And I was actually on the Concom. I missed all the meetings. It was a long commute. I did the program book for the World Fantasy Convention that year, so I've known the guys a long time, and the gals. And so I do 3 to 5 titles a year, and mostly science fiction, fantasy, and some dark fantasy. A lot of short story collections. It's a good niche for me to publish short fiction in that respect. Some anthologies, a few novels. And before the press started, I did Tailbones magazine for 14 years. Some of you may know that. That closed in 2009 to concentrate on my writing. And I sold my first novel just a few months ago to Tor. So as far as how many titles I'll be doing the next couple of years and getting more writing done, I don't know. So that's kind of in flux for me.
So, any questions from the audience? Anything you'd like to know about publishers or publishing or acquisitions?
Already?
I have a terribly specific question that's probably not really pertinent. Justin, what's your YA hat called?
It's called, sorry, that's a very good question. It's called Lycaon Press, Lycaon. It's from Greek.
That's like our company name.
It's from the Greek language and Greek mythology. There we go.
I'd like to know if you've ever mixed up a title meant for the erotic line for the YA ship it.
Well, we do share the same editor portals, so some of our editors go, is this for the young adult or the erotic? Yeah.
That figured out it's a real problem.
Well, exactly. Yeah. That's why we don't cross-pollinate editors.
I saw a hand back there. Yeah.
Stupidity and lots of it.
I think that sums it up for all of us. An editor, a publisher, those are two different things. I can tell you how I became an editor. It's kind of random. I was a reviewer primarily and a critic for years. I started getting interested in telling the good self-published authors from the crap and then discovered there were no good self-published. No, I'm overstating it, right? So a self-published author sent me their book. I reviewed it. I loved it. I gave it a rave, so I started corresponding. I then edited their next book for them as a development editor. And then I became so interested in what they were doing that when I found out she had a publishing company, she offered me work as an editor, and I said yes. And so we've been working together to build a company. So I don't know that that's a career path anybody else could follow. And then the publisher, she had a novel she'd sent out to every publisher on earth and was frustrated because her rejections letter said it was a historical romance fantasy. And the romance publisher said, well, there's too much fantasy. And the fantasy said there's too much romance. So she put it away for 10 years. And finally there were some romance fantasy publishers. So she thought for sure. And they said, well, there's too much historical content. And so then she sent it to another publisher somebody recommended to her who was okay with historical fantasy romance, and they said, but it's too Canadian, it's set in Ontario, we can't handle it. So in disgust and frustration, she published, because each of the editors would say, this is the best book I've read in 10 years, but I just can't put it in my line, right? And I understand that that's a reasonable response. So she self-published that and then said, well, this is ridiculously easy, right? And so started publishing more books. And then other people, and then one of the small presses in the neighborhood went under. So she took over all of their authors, and then we've been growing the company since. So basically you just kind of, do it.
I was.
Want to give stories about how we got into our positions?
I think that's a great idea.
Sure.
Okay.
I was writing it. I was my post Clarion West years, late '80s. I was writing and selling some short fiction, and then I got a story published in a very small press magazine called Figment. I don't know if I see a few nods. Edited by Barb and J.C. Hendy, who now have a best-selling fantasy series with Rock, and then I got to know them, and they became really good friends, and they lived across Washington State from me, but I'd go visit, and I'd see them at conventions. And then JC did this music review column, and I said, oh, this would be a great choice for your next one, CDs that had science fiction fantasy themes. He said, why don't you do it? Because I don't have time anymore to do them. So I wrote some columns, and then sometimes at the house they said, you want to read some slush? I said, okay. And I actually loved it, and I picked out the story from them by a writer named Carl Schroeder.
Yeah.
I said, I think you'll like this. It was one of his first sales. He was just starting to sell. I feel pretty good about that.
Spy,
yeah, he had sold some, but and I just really liked doing it. And then they closed up Figment to concentrate on school and writing, and I said, well, that was fun. And so I decided I would try Tailbones, and that's how I started the magazine, editing that. And then the book line started because one of the writers who I'd published came to me asking about would I like to do a collection. New York doesn't want to do it because it's 1/3 poetry, 1/3 essay, and 1/3 fiction. And there's no niche in New York that's going to publish that. But I loved his writing in my magazine. He'd already had a couple novels published, and but I published his first short story. I said, yes, let me figure out how I'm going to do that, and I'll get back to you. And that was my first book we published. So if I had any suggestion is, if you get a chance to read Slush, that would be a good time. And I know there's some guys here too. Randy, is Randy here? McCharles? No. I see Michael over there too. Remember that when you came to my house and read Slush one day? I said, you guys want to read Slush? They were like reading everything all the way through. And I've got 15 done. What are you guys doing? It's like, shoot, we don't want to miss something. So, but it's a really good experience if you get a chance to sign on as a Slush reader.
I was going to say, how many people here started out by reading Slush?
In some way or another.
Some way or another. I was with two other presses before reading Slush before I got involved with this one.
Yeah, I started, I was as a writer, writing short stories, and the opportunity came up to be a volunteer slush pile reader for a small Canadian press. And so I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, I can learn all the tricks of the trade, I can get better at my writing, learn what they're looking for, and become a better writer. And slush reading was fun. I did that for a couple of years, and through networking and through knowing people and getting pretty good at that. Oh well, could you help us do this? Could you do this? And you start volunteering your time and start helping people and working your way up. And before you know it, I was managing another small Canadian imprint for them for over a year. And it was a revelation. And I realized that while I will always write, I had a real passion for publishing. I don't agree with your friend who said that publishing is easy. Publishing is not easy.
No, I meant mechanically. I didn't
Yeah. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so when the opportunity came, I left to start a family, and then started up my own company to continue doing that. So that's my story.
Well, I'm not an editor. I can line edit like crazy, but I suck at developmental editing, so I hire people who are very good at it. But I started out 20 gazillion years ago as a writer, and I had a couple of good experiences publishing. I had a couple of really bad experiences publishing. And I remember sitting having vanilla lattes with my girlfriend Penelope and complaining. Oh, worse than complaining, I was bitching. I was bitching about everything in the process. And she said, listen, lady, you have been complaining for years. You've been saying for years you could do a better job. So it's time to put up or shut up. Here I am.
Put up.
I didn't put out, I put up.
But out came later with erotica, right?
Well, yes, there's that. But yeah, so a lot of it was learning, trial and error, learning from other publishers that I knew, asking a lot of dumb questions, but it all paid off. I'm very happy with what I do. And for the first time in my life, I love getting up in the morning and going to work. And I could never say that before.
So I started out as a bookseller. I knew that I wanted to work in books, and I thought, I'll never get into editorial. I'm never going to be a published writer, so I'm going to work in a bookstore. And I did that for about 7 years, loved every minute of it, and would still be there if they paid me a living wage, which they did not. And all the money that I made there, I poured right back into the business. I got a great staff discount, but it wasn't enough. So I was an independent bookseller for 7 years. And then I had an opportunity to be a book buyer for a national chain. And I thought, what's better than selling books, going through catalogs and picking out books for other people to read? So I was a book buyer for a national chain that runs bookstores in all the major Canadian airports. And I did that for about 2 years, got to travel the country. It was a lovely way to make a living. And from there, I saw one day in the Quill Enquirer an opening for a sales rep position at Penguin. And I thought, well, I'll give that a try. So I applied. I got the job. I was the sales rep for Southwestern Ontario, and my job was to drive around in my company car to all the independent booksellers in Ontario, sit down with them with that big stack of Penguin catalogs and talk about books all day long, take them out for lunch on the company expense account, and then go back home to my home office. I didn't have to work out of the publisher's office, and that was the greatest gig of all time. And then 3 years later, I got a call from our publisher saying, there's an opening in our editorial department. Do you want to try your hand at editing commercial fiction? And I said, yes, but I don't have any editorial experience. And she said, don't worry, you know the market, you know readers, you know what people want. And so I said, okay, I had no choice. I had to take it. There was no way that I was going to turn down that opportunity. So I joined the editorial department at Penguin about 3 years ago, and it was the best decision of my life. I felt like an imposter right out of the gate. But then I started to acquire books that I loved, and to my great surprise and delight, they started to hit the Globe and Mail bestseller list. So I've learned to trust my taste and know that my background in sales will serve me well for as long as I have the privilege of working for Penguin. So that's my career path.
Mine is kind of interesting. I started off in science fiction and fantasy. I love science fiction and fantasy. That's where my heart will always be. But I was secretly a romance reader. I liked reading certain types of romance books.
All the dirty stuff.
I know. Yeah, hotter the better. No, anyway, I kept seeing all these self-published books that were horrifically done, like covers of people's pets that,
Back to pets again.
I swear there's not a theme in my like people taking pictures of their cats and putting them on the couch and having some strange title in a font that you can't read. To me that's a horrible cover, and should never see the light of day besides perhaps on your computer screen and so I thought, well, why not create a publishing company that prides itself in quality and great covers and great editing. And so that's pretty much how I started up Breathless Press. And then how I started Lycaean is one of my romance authors who writes the raunchiest historical romance. She goes, I have an idea for a young adult book. And I said, it can't have sex in it. And she goes, oh, well, darn. And then so a couple months later, she says, I have an idea for a young adult series. And I said, does it have sex in it? She goes, no, I removed all the sex. And so she pitched the idea to me, and I said, well, that's great, but I don't have a young adult imprint. And she goes, well, you're going to create one. Oh, okay. And so she convinced me to start up Lycaean Press, and all of her friends who, up until a couple months ago, they were all unpublished, and they all wrote young adult books in their spare time, and so that's how Lycaean Press came about. It was basically thrust upon me by one of my authors. Not regretting it, but yeah.
I think that's everyone. Any other questions? That was a good question, by the way. I got
One up front here.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
If you hire slash readers, what is your criteria for hiring them, and what makes them trust their judgment?
The first criteria is they're cheap or free.
That's a very important criteria.
They're usually part of the community around your press. So we attract writers, we attract friends of writers, right? And through those personal relationships, we often know that I can trust those person. I assume most other pressers are more systematic. When I've been a slush reader, it's always because as a critic and an editor, and I'm a university professor, is my day job, because they know me as a critic. They learn through my reviews to trust me, and therefore they would ask me, could you do this as a favor, and then it just becomes a horrible habit. Anybody else? Yeah.
So that's how I got into slush, was stalking people at cons and befriending publishers and doing the networking thing. I mean, people say that this is, it's really important, get yourself out there and meet people, and it really is. And I mean, if that's the career path you want, that's the best way to do it, is to surround, be part of that community around that publishing company, and then they turn to that community when they're looking for slush readers. And for us, when we're looking for slush readers, what we actually do is we actually send a sample short story out, and we say, if we were to accept short stories and we were to give this to you as a slush reader to review, what would your feedback be? And all of us in the press would have reviewed this short story for a bazillion times, so we would judge that slush applicant based on how they reviewed that short story. And that's how we do it. That way we know, okay, well, yeah, they picked up pretty much everything we caught, so then, yeah, they've got the same sort of eye.
There's, slush reading, I mentioned to you, earlier. Also, if you get a chance to do an internship with a publishing company, too. I know a publishing company who was hiring interns, particularly every year they had a different intern, and then they were also both writers, the partners who ran the press, and then years later, one of the publishers of the press, they'd stopped the press the intern became his boss. She got a job at not TSR, Wizards of the Coast, and bought one of his books, and then so that's pretty funny. But that being said, I never took on a slush pile, a slush person, or an intern, because I didn't. To be honest with you, myself, this is just me. I didn't trust that I was gonna. I was afraid of missing something. I knew what I liked, and Tailbone started off with my ex-wife and I, so we kind of knew each other's tastes, and it worked out real well. But yeah, that was just kind of a weird thing for me. I felt no. Or the same thing with an intern. It's like, and then I'd have to train them, and then they're gonna be gone, and then I have to do more work to train the next one. And what if I miss something that is going to be really great?
But slush readers do not make any real big decisions, so
No.
It's up to them to make recommendations. Yes, I really like this book because, or no, I really didn't like this book, and this is why. So we get our list then of, yes, these are possibilities, these are not possibilities, but, I'm looking at these no's. And, for example, I had a reader who read a science fiction novel, and in it was this hover car, science fiction set in the future, and the car hovers around. And she said, it's a really good story, but it's so unrealistic. Cars don't fly. So we moved it from this pile to this pile and had some, the rest of our team then start to look at some of these other books. So it's just, we look for opinions, we look for ways to break that slush pile that's this high down to something a little more manageable. So it's not that you're going to make a great big decision, you just help us make our decision.
We actually don't have slush readers. We make our editors read it because our editors will ultimately go, this needs a lot of work, and it's just simply not worth it. And the editors will know how well a book is selling because we give our editors the information. Like if they come to us and say, how is our gay erotica selling? And we say, well, it's selling really good and we need more books in this genre. We can't really necessarily share that with slush readers because they may not last. Slush readers may not be around for any length of time, so we don't want to be broadcasting everything. That being said, we run our company like an open book. If you want to know how many books we sold, I'll tell you. If you want to know what our best-selling book is, I'll tell you. You don't have. We're not cryptic. But that being said, editors don't have the final say. They then have to get approval from their managing editor, and then twice a month, all the managing editors meet online. We're all spread out throughout the world, but we meet online and then we discuss the books that may have potential, and then we say yes to this one, no to that one, and so on and so forth. But the editors are the ones that read through the slush pile and they pick out the gems.
At Penguin, we don't really have a slush pile per se. We accept manuscripts that come in from agents mostly. And all of the editors do their own reading. And when they find something that they love, they bring it to a weekly meeting called Pub Board that's attended by the president and the publisher and the sales executives and the marketing and publicity executives. And it's the role of the editor to build a consensus to get the salespeople on board and the marketing and publicity people on board. And sometimes when you love a book and you're fighting really hard for it, you can't convince everyone. And in those cases, we don't make an offer to publish because we know that without everyone around the table on board, the odds of making a success of a particular book are against us. So we build consensus at Penguin. We get the whole company behind it, the whole company reading it, and then we throw everything we have behind it.
In the back.
With the slush piles, would only one reader get one submission, or does that submission go to like 3 different readers?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think it depends on the company that you're talking to here. I think for Alan and myself, I don't know about anybody else, but it goes to
Minimum 3. Minimum 3 for us. I don't know about you.
Well, we're also still new. I mean, we've only been in existence for really a year, so the submissions that we get, our senior editor, our acquisitions editor, actually reads through most of them, even though they do go out to slush readers. If they come back and say it was absolutely atrocious, she'll read the first page to confirm that it's atrocious, and then send back the rejection letter. But as we grow, the plan is each submission will go to multiple slush readers to get that sort of consensus. Thank you on how the book is.
We deal with words, not necessarily good with words.
My company doesn't do that because we don't have multiple slush readers. If I had more, I'd probably spread it around more. But at the moment, our slush reader is the editor, me, or the other editor if it's a young adult, or I'll give it to my daughter to read. She's 14, and if she likes it, then it's going to 14-year-olds, right? But I think it varies company to company. Mostly the rule is if you send it in to the company and whoever they've assigned it to, that's your shot. You can't say, well, it was rejected by Hartwell, I'll go over to this other editor at the same firm. No, once somebody in the company said no, then you're done with that company.
I've sort of got a nearly finished science fiction story in which the protagonist is a 9-year-old girl, and it deals with religious discrimination and pedophilia. And I don't really know sort of quite what, is this young adult, child, adult, or what? And will an author, will a publisher touch it, or should I just go to sort of the self-published ebook, or what?
Okay, is the book in favor of the pedophilia, or?
Been asking about pedophilia.
You publish YA. We do publish some YA. So for us, if the main character is 9 years old and it deals with pedophilia, and if there's a lot of graphic violence, we would not be aiming it at the YA market. It would be an adult book. And it would have to be really, really careful about how it portrays that kind of stuff. We say that about any kind of graphic violence. That's just how that would go. So.
Anyone else?
We don't do middle grade YA either. And again, I agree, actually. That whole pedophilia thing is such a touchy area that, depending on how you're showing it, how you're talking about it, how you're depicting it, would all depend on if we were interested or not.
Yeah, part of my motivation for writing this is I think it's something we don't sort of talk to children enough about, and don't warn children enough about. Also, I think it's very strange. I've never heard of a story where a child fights a pedophile.
You're all sitting here thinking.
I can't imagine a 9-year-old picking up a book like that, though, to read.
Yeah.
And personally, I just wouldn't
I wouldn't
touch
give it to a
that.
9-year-old to read. No.
Ditto that.
I saw another hand back here. Yeah.
I was wondering if you guys could comment on marketing novels versus anthologies.
I don't want to speak for everyone, but anthologies don't sell.
No, not for us.
Oh, pardon me.
Not for us.
Pardon me. I misspoke. I'm thinking collections. You're talking. Yeah.
No, anthologies don't sell very well for us either, so we don't look for them either.
I think some themed anthologies work. So I'll shut up. I misspoke. Go ahead.
Here, you speak.
You speak.
Can you suggest why they don't sell?
Anthologies are really hard to sell. I won't say that we have a bestseller or anything like that. We enjoy anthologies because for us, I mean, we come from a background of writers, and we have a large writing community, and a lot of them enjoy reading short fiction. So that's where we're coming from. But I know. Anthologies are really hard to sell because a lot of the general public don't really want to read a bunch of short stories. They want one consistent story throughout the entire book, and they're not very popular, and they are just a hard sell. I don't know how else to better articulate that.
For me, it's I don't do as many novels as collections, but novels have tended to sell the best. At least my best-selling book is a novel, and then collections, and then anthologies are way down low for me. I don't make much on them at all. But just like Tailbones, the magazine was basically a loss leader for me when I started the press 5 years later for doing books. And 95% of my list for Fairwood are Tailbones alums. Yeah. So, and when I stopped the magazine, I essentially killed my R&D department. So, an anthology might be a loss leader with getting some new names and talent that I could go to later and ask about a collection or a novel that they might have.
That's actually how we find most of our authors, and that's how we get our name out as a press. A lot of authors are looking for places where they can submit not only their short stories, but they've got a novel as well that they're interested in submitting. So once they've had a chance to work with us as a press through the anthology, then they know what we're like, and we find that they're more willing to submit their novels to us as well.
Penguin's done a number of pretty successful anthologies. The Penguin Book of Canadian Literature, Penguin Book of Canadian Short Stories, edited by Jane Urquhart, the Penguin Book of Crime Stories, edited by Peter Robinson. They are difficult to sell. Booksellers tend not to order them in quantity, but we find that once we have a high-profile editor who can do a significant amount of promotion for us, then we can lift it, and we do regional tours where the contributors to said anthology can maybe get on stage with the editor and promote that way. But they are very, very difficult and hard to get off the ground. You're also dealing with a lot of permissions work and a lot of clearing of rights. So they're pretty labor intensive.
We do anthologies, but like Ellen said, they're not profitable. We are very picky on what stories go in them. Up until, well, it still even is, we mainly only accept in-house authors for the anthologies because they have a reader base already, whereas a new author, we don't know what their reader base is. Mm-hmm. We are releasing a collection of flash stories, which are stories under 1,000 words, and the only people that are in that anthology are in-house authors, just because they can then go to their readers and go, hey, I'm in this anthology, you should pick it up. And then that way it also cross-promotes the other authors. We do have open calls on our website, but we are very, very picky on new authors for the anthologies.
I think you were next in that red shirt.
So you just touched on talent development. I mean, how important is that? I used to work at a medium-sized Canadian publishing house, and for us, the wisdom that we gained over the years was that you didn't really make a lot of money off of an author's first book. It was later, and especially when awards came, because this is Canada. But do you form relationships with these authors, and how important is that to you from a financial standpoint?
Who would like to take that?
Well, I know every one of our signed authors, and I make it a point of knowing their names, their husbands' names or wife's names. Most of the time, I might not know their exact city, but I know the state or the country they live in. I have all their contact information if I need it, and quite often I'll phone them at home if I know that they're going through something in their life that they need a little support. So relationships are really important to me. You're right, we don't often make a lot of money off of a first book. So we are hoping to grow their careers with them. Hopefully they'll want to stay with us as that career grows. And that's always a risk that you take. Sometimes they start off with us and then they get an offer from another place where they think they're a better fit. And that's unfortunate because we've already invested so much time and money. But as their career grows and evolves, so does their readership, so do their sales. And so then we do benefit. And so do they. They benefit from all the experience they've gained. They benefit from a growth in a relationship that is now a little more personal than just a, hi, Mr. Smith, how are you? It's now, hi, John, or something like that. I do very much like to keep in touch with my editors on a frequent basis And again, like I said, with our authors, if anything is going on in their life, I'm picking up the phone and talking to them. And they like that.
Do you want to go, Tina?
Oh, I was just going to agree that's how we do things at Taiki as well. It's one of the reasons why we started Taiki. As we were both coming from it as writers, we wanted that relationship with our publishers, and thus far we hadn't really gotten that. And so we wanted to create a press where that kind of respect and that kind of relationship and stuff was built. And we do want to build I think it's called the long tail, where you want to build someone up as they grow.
We are very much the same like that. There are some authors that we have that just are not personable, so we try and not build that relationship with them, but at the same time, they are really good sellers. We don't see very many sales on first books. That's why we encourage authors to submit more than at least 2 books to us before they make an opinion that, well, maybe their readership just isn't for me or whatever they might form. There are authors that I talk to every single day. There are authors that I've unfortunately given my cell phone number to, and they text me 2, 3 in the morning because they're in a different country, and I talk to my editors every single day. There's not a time that goes by that an editor isn't messaging me on Google or anything like that. So building that relationship, and the authors that have that relationship with us, their sales are probably about twice as much as what the authors who don't, just because they feel like their publishing company is their best friend, maybe.
Well, maybe we care.
Yeah.
We're their best friend,
Yeah.
but we care. Yeah.
We're a micro publisher, like a micro brewery, so we're very small. But we started it quite explicitly with the idea of developing new Canadian voices. We had to cross out, when we said publishing new Canadian voices, we had to cross out new because we started to do reprints of, we thought, great Canadian authors that have vanished over time. But I'm an educator, and so I'm really interested in helping develop writers. So this is not quite a hobby activity of mine. It's kind of a compulsion. But we're more interested in relationship. And we're hoping that in the long run, we're still too new to know how well this is going to work, right? But we're hoping in the long run people will stay with us because of that relationship. And what we're looking at is Cheesing, who were here this weekend. I don't know how many of you went to their party or whatever, but they are the exemplary small press. Because they didn't just build the press, they didn't just encourage a few writers, they built a bloody community. If you go to Toronto and watch what they're doing, they have monthly readings, they have a whole series of events, salons basically, where 100, 150 horror writers show up every month and interact with each other. And it's that community that's lifted the entire press, because it's not just an individual author, it's the whole stupid community has become a school. Like, it's become a movement within horror fiction. They completely changed the face of horror, I think, in the last 5 years. And they've become making a presence in Canadian lit because they're this integrated relationship. So whenever the press has a problem, we need to get this done, there are 15 people lined up to volunteer to help them out. And we're trying to develop the same kind of community. It's a bit harder because we don't live in Toronto and we're more virtual than real. But I think that relationship is the key. And none of those authors think of going anywhere else because that's the press, not only that developed them, but has, as a group, done fantastic things, and that's how they ended up with a mainstream distributor, right? So I think the small presses that will survive will be the ones that are based on the relationships like you're hearing.
That the same is true for the big guys. We, like all of what everyone else has said here, we're more interested in publishing authors than individual books, and building relationships and investing in writers whose talents we wholeheartedly believe in. I've had the experience in the last 3 years to acquire a number of debut fiction writers, Canadians, because I have to build my list from the ground up. I'm starting fresh. So I've signed 3 debut authors and made them bestsellers right out of the gate, and what happens is we pay them modest advances, and then they earn out quicker, and so in-house they look really, really successful, which is going to make it really easy for me to go back to Pub Board and say, the second book is on submission, and since the first one did so well, let's buy the second one. And I'm able to do that if I blow my brains out on a first novel with a really high advance and then it doesn't earn out. I've done that author a huge disservice. Our expectations have been too high, and the author suffers for that. So it is possible to make an author a great success, critical or commercial, right out of the gate. It's a hard thing to do, certainly, but that's what we want to do, and we're very much in it for the long haul. I too become friends with my authors. I really believe in them, and they're treading in unfamiliar territory, and they need someone to kind of show them the ropes. And I try and be as forthcoming as possible, maybe sometimes too forthcoming, but we work well together and we trust each other, and that's also how I retain the talent, because once they hit the big time, everyone comes a-knocking, and I want them to stay with me.
I think we have time for one last question. So, in the back there.
Most of you say you're part of the small press. What happens when one of your authors that you've cultivated is getting big enough, with Adrienne, whatever, you got your Canadian author, he's doing well in Canada, how would you introduce him to the States? Or would that be, they're independent on that, or would you have a relationship with editors in other countries that you can move your authors to?
Speaking for my small micro-brewery kind of press, there is no border. We buy all rights, not just Canadian rights, and we sell on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and it does, in Russia. I mean, wherever there's people buying books, we can sell to them there. So that just is a non-issue for us.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, we buy worldwide rights.
We try to buy world rights too.
Don't always get them, do you?
No, we don't always get them.
But by the way, I'm feeling much better about my advance. So after your talk, thank you.
Real quick, agents. You need agents at Penguin?
Yeah.
The rest of you don't care?
No. Well,
don't care what?
We care. And I love agents.
Do you work with agents or no?
Agents are easier to
love
work with.
agents.
Agents are
Agents
great.
tend to vet out the slush much better, but we do not require agents.
Yeah.
see, we're on the opposite end of the scale from Penguin, right? They won't take it without an agent. Agents don't know we exist and would, don't go to them, right? Go to Penguin. So we don't get agents of stuff. I find authors at conventions like this.
I have some authors who have agents, but the agents don't care about the collections or the smaller stuff. I don't know if some of you may know Jay Lake. I published his first novel. It predates his tour novels. And I asked him about novels that he had, and he recommended a couple, and he said, my agent said this looks like it would be a good book for a small press. So he has sold that one to me, and it's been one of my best sellers. And then his agent came back to me and said, so, mass market rights and foreign rights, did you buy those? She came back to me later and says, kind of a little verbal, yeah, if it happens, here's what it is. So
That's
mostly I
book.
don't usually deal with agents. A couple writers do because that's the way their agreement works with their agents. So
Go buy the Jay Lake book from his table. It's the best book.
Yeah, we will deal with agents and have dealt with agents, but it's not a requirement.
I don't think an agent has ever submitted to us, so I can't comment. We did have an agent email and ask if we accept agented works, and I responded with yes, we do, and then that was it. Maybe not the answer they were looking for.
there were a couple of times where agents asked me about a project if they could send me a project, and I said, well, I'm a very small list, and I mostly get my own projects. But while I'll have you, I'm looking for an agent for my work. They never responded back. I'm just kidding.
I think we're done. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much.